It has beautiful waterfronts, city, mountain, and marine views to see.
Manchester, Washington. Manchester, Washington. Manchester has gradually changed over the years. As its hills, terrains, landscapes have shifted gears. The ancestors and pioneers have passed down their recollection of the olden days,
The old lifestyles, works, businesses,
and the early transport ways. I have been in Manchester for some time,
and remember what it was like since I have lived here.
my memories of families, friends, and people, my experience in Manchester, with you I share. I have been in Manchester for some time,
And remember what it was like since I have lived here.
my memories of families, friends, and people, my experience in Manchester, with you I share. With you I share. With you I share.
We have here today, we have Chuck Hower in the middle, okay, and we have Eric Cisney and his brother Mr. Cisney on the right, David Cisney, okay. These are what I refer to as some of the Manchester pioneers. So these are people that settled here years ago, and Chuck was very close. We consider Harper to be on our outskirts, so he's welcome to be in the Manchester Historical Archive. Basically, we're doing historical interviews with the pioneers of Manchester. So to get started, we'd like we can go from left to right. We'd like you to introduce yourself and when you came to Manchester and some of your memories of early Manchester.
Okay, so I'm Eric Cisney. We moved here in June of 1950. My parents had gotten divorced. We lived over in Normandy Park. We had 5 acres over there. And they were going to be putting in a water system, and we're going to have to get a mortgage to pay for it, and my mother couldn't afford it. Dad was still supporting us, but it was going to be tough. So anyway, Dad and Mom knew some people over here, the Goodwins, over in near Long Lake, and they said that there was a lot of cheap real estate around here because the ferry had just been taken from Manchester, moved down to Harper, and a lot of people worked in Seattle, took the ferry across, and not all of them had cars. Anyway, we came over and walked along came over, got the ferry to Harper, and we walked along the beach part of the way, and looking at places, and turns out the place we finally bought was owned by the Hershey's, And Mr. Hershey worked in Seattle. I can't remember what he did over there, but I don't remember. But anyway, he would walk down. We're just a half mile up the street. He'd walk down here, take the ferry across to Seattle. Well, when they took the ferry away, he had trouble getting to work. And it was tough getting to Harper if he didn't have a car. And anyway, we bought the place. And by the way, I don't know if you know Judd Heathcote, if you've heard that name. He's a very famous basketball coach. He and his brother were raised there. The Hersheys were his grandparents. Anyway, the kids and their mother, Fawn, moved out here and lived with the Hersheys. And Fawn, eventually, she married Jerry Cunningham, who was the barber here for many years.
Yes.
And the kids were raised in our house. And Judd wrote a book called Judd, and the first chapter of that talks about in Manchester. So that's something worth looking up.
Yes.
Talks about they didn't have a car. The kids would hitchhike everywhere. They did logging, all kinds of work, but they hitchhiked everywhere.
Right.
Anyway, so we moved here in June 1950, and Mom had her library degree, and so she got work here with the regional library. She worked in Bookmobile.
Could you say about what date that would be?
Well, it would have been pretty soon, I think. I'm not sure what date, but I know she was the librarian here when the library was still in the chicken house down the street here.
Okay.
And in fact, David and I remember moving out of the chicken house in 52 or 53 when they tore it down and built the duplex and the other house there. Dave Dennison said his, what was his grandfather?
Yeah.
Built that,
Right.
built the duplexes. But we were moving the books out, and he was there with a crowbar taking the place down already. Anyway.
What was it? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just, what do you remember about the store and the restaurant and the boathouse and any of that?
I don't remember that, but I didn't get down here that much. David's got a better memory of some of that than I do. I know the store that was across the street here had a big freezer, deal in there, deep freeze, and we bought a quarter of beef and put it in there. That's where we kept our meat.
No, I forgot that they had
The
one.
street is up.
Well, we were right here.
Okay, but
There was one across there too.
We had some up there too.
Yeah, but I remember this one here is what I remember.
Two of them.
Yeah.
It burned down too.
Yeah, all I know about the lockers up here,
Yeah.
up here behind the restaurant.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure there was one here too, because I remember when it burned down.
Well, I heard about it, but I don't remember that.
Yeah, I think it was still sticking up.
Oh.
But anyway, yeah.
And the gas station, was that mobile then, or?
That's what I remember. Yeah, Pop Burbaugh owned the gas station.
Yes, right.
And in high school I was down here a lot, hanging out. I've always been interested in cars. And he was a really good guy.
Yeah.
A nice guy. And our neighbor Gene Pritchard owned the gas station where the Sturdy Products building is now.
Right. Do you have any recollection of his station?
Yeah, when we moved over,
Yeah.
Mom didn't have a car. She didn't have a driver's license at the time, so Dad bought her an old 33 Plymouth, I think, and had it parked down here. Gene said we could park it down here, and Gene Pritchard was going to teach Mom to drive.
Oh.
And it turns out he said the car wasn't good enough shape, so we bought a 40 Chev, and she learned to drive in that.
Oh.
I guess Gene helped her.
Now, did he have glass balls on the pump that you have to fill up?
Don't think so. Don't think so.
I thought I remembered something.
It could have been. I don't know.
Did Gene, was this his first station right here where before Pop?
No, he didn't. I don't think so, but I don't know.
Okay, I thought, okay.
When we moved here, I think it was just the one across the street. And then he moved from there into Port Orchard for a while.
Yeah.
He had a station in there.
Right next to Deal's plumbing supplies.
Yeah, it was,
Shell station, I think.
yeah. Yeah, for years, when they built that big building there, the old station was still inside. If you walked in, you could still see the the old gas station there. They didn't,
Oh.
they didn't tear it down when they built the building.
Oh,
And Rich, a few years ago, they did renovate inside and they tore that all out. But, yeah, that was interesting.
yeah, I think I saw Standard Oil colors on the building when Rich started his remodel. I
Yeah.
took something off that was a Standard Oil stuff on it.
Yeah, that could have been. I can't remember what brand that was. It may have changed over the years too. But,
Yeah.
yeah. But I remember, I thought Pop was mobile.
Yeah, Pop was mobile.
Yeah,
Then when Ellery Hovgaard bought it out,
yeah,
it ran for a while.
yeah.
Right, okay. Well, you will come back to you, but we'll just take, move on to Chuck.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chuck Hower. I'm sort of an interloper in here, like Bob said, because I grew up down Harper. I was born in 1940. Spent all my youth right there in Harper. My father ran the Hower Evergreens, one of the early businesses in that area.
So, did you pick brush for your dad?
Yes, I don't know how young I was the first time I went brush picking, but it's just been part of my life.
Yeah, was it Huck, Salal, was there market, what was the market then?
It was mainly huckleberry brush.
How much did you get paid?
I don't remember that, but I remember, you would go out into the woods and if you were lucky, you would find a bush that had all kinds of nice foliage on it that when you would pick it, you would get a handful, and then when a handful got too big, you'd lay the handful down. I hope where you remembered where you put it, and then you would move on, get another handful, and you could trace where you've been by following all your handfuls of brush. And then he would bundle them up and would bring them into my dad's packing shed.
Okay, did you use a brush hook or did you use rubber bands or what?
No, it's used just snapping them. Snap it with your fingers.
No, I mean to bunch them.
Oh, when they were bunched, it was, they would sort it out and
But
pack them up, and then they had this one thing that was on a swivel, and they would have these wire
Right.
with little loops on each end, and they would, go like that, twirl it and tighten them down. And then they'd be packed off and end up back in New York City.
Right.
that brush plant, before that, the old brick plant used to be there, didn't they? Was that the same location?
Yes, not where the brush plant was, but
That's interesting.
Same plot of land almost, wasn't it? It seems like it's pretty much there.
the brick plant was, the brush house was the old cookhouse and bunkhouse.
Yeah, for the brick
Or
plant.
the,
Yeah.
So that was in operation, the brick company was in operation then?
No,
That was shut down by then.
it had been shut down. That was in the,
that went south in the 1930s.
yeah, that was probably in the 20s and maybe, yeah.
Harper Brick and Tile.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there's a good write-up, I've got that online too, there's a good write-up about the history of that. Forget the guy's name, but I guess all the brick, he built the governor's mansion from his brick.
Well, there's a lot of rumors about where those bricks were and where they were used and all that, but I don't think any of it's ever really been documented.
I had some at our place. There was a house that
Yeah.
had burned down, but it had made of those bricks. It was,
Okay, you guys together think, what year would you believe that they moved the ferry from Manchester to Harper and the year that they moved it from Harper to Southwark?
Well, I know they moved it from Harper to Southworth in 1960.
1960?
and I think here it was either 48 or 49.
The ferry, the Harper Ferry was there all the time. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
1919, I think, is when they actually started car ferry, and they went, they went to Vashon Heights, and then they go down to Pier 3, and then in 25, I don't know, was it the county or PSN, they built the Fauntleroy dock in 25.
Oh, it was in 25? Because
Fauntleroy, yeah.
I understand that the ferry from Manchester went to Alki.
It did.
Right, it did.
And then, do you know when they moved it to Coleman Dock?
It actually got, if it's a storm or something.
There was a hurricane, I don't know what part of 34, there was a big hurricane, and the dock in Alki was pretty shaky, and it caved in.
So
Then they went to Pier 3.
So from here to Seattle, direct to Seattle.
Okay, well, the brush business was, it was kind of an interesting way to make a living. 'Cause, you know, if you like being outside in the woods and have nobody supervising you all day long, it's perfect. But
Yeah.
it's not really fun when it's pouring down rain and temperature's 35 degrees and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, let's see now, where was I going with that?
No, I brought it up. I just wanted you to share some experiences
Remember, you
you
were
had in
still-
the brush business.
Occasionally picking brush in high school and not in college, I guess, but
Oh, yeah, I did.
yeah, that's
I,
right.
I'm brush picking, I finished college with absolutely no debt,
Yeah,
partly due to picking brush and the other was I was playing in a band in Seattle.
he played the sax, and every Friday I know you wouldn't be
Yeah.
there. You had a door.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
So then what'd you do when you went to the University of Washington and graduated there?
yeah, uh-huh.
What year is that?
62.
62, and then what'd you do?
I was right here, Eric was there right with me. We
Yeah.
were roommates
We-
for 2 years at the UW.
We stayed in the dorms.
Oh, wow. Then what'd you do?
And then I knew I was gonna be drafted, they still had the draft back then. So I joined the Army for 3 years. And I spent the entire time in Washington DC. So I finished my 3 years in Washington DC in the Army and I came back to Seattle. Got a job working at People's National Bank in their management trainee program. And I was here about 6 months and I started to get antsy feet and sort of missed some of the stuff that I had to be familiar with back in Washington DC. So I drove down to Portland and talked to a recruiter and filled out the forms, and they called me back and gave me a polygraph test and all that kind of stuff. So next thing I knew, they offered me a job. So I said, well, I can't turn down a chance to do that. Retired, came back here and built a brand new, marvelous, all-cedar home right on the spot where I grew up. So even though I was gone for 30 years, I've been around Harper and Manchester most of my life. Let's see, anybody have any questions about what else? My recollection of Manchester is significantly different than Eric and David's, but nobody made any mention of the Scaveniuses. Fritz Scavenius was a concert pianist, and he was Danish, but he was raised in England.
No, I didn't know that.
And somewhere along the line, I remember him telling me that he had taken piano lessons from Mozart's student.
Oh,
Anyway, so Mr. Scavenius was quite the old school character, you know, throwback to a bygone era.
wow. Yeah, that's something.
But his wife taught piano until into the 90s, I think, or close to it anyway.
Right.
I know my daughter, Ann, took piano lessons from her.
Okay.
Their piano studio was right across the street,
And down
down
there.
here where the boat launch is.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, David. Could you share with us?
I'm David Cisney, and of course Eric's brother. We moved here, like Eric said, we moved here in June. I think it was early June. It wasn't early June because it was before the Korean War started.
Yeah,
And I think
as soon as school got out, we moved
yeah,
over here.
the Korean War started on the 26th. But anyway, there's still a lot of military traffic and mostly dump trucks. We call them army trucks. I think it was probably Navy Seabees because they're doing a lot of work down there at the fuel depot. And apparently they're covering the fuel tanks with dirt, but they're just trucks going back and forth all the time. Anyway, Eric and I used to walk down here, just like we did today. We walked down to Manchester. And, there was the drugstore, and I think that Oaks were the people, old people.
Oaks owned a drugstore?
Oaks, yes.
That was before Helen Fleming?
Okay, that name I don't know, but I think it was Mr. Oaks, as I recall, and yeah, we used to.
Did Bob Tripp have the variety?
Right, the hardware store.
And then,
Yeah, right.
and then the grocery store, and like, those are Bergs, I believe,
Bergs?
Bergs. as I
At the
recall.
grocery store?
Yeah, and, so, yeah, Eric and I used to buy bubble gum and kind of flat, and it was peel them off, and then there was usually an airplane, like a fighter plane or a B-17 or something like that. I still have all those. I should have brought them, but I still have all those pictures. But
What kind of, I mean, the model,
Yeah,
how Boston one day?
no, just a pic, just a little, kind of like a half size of postcard, just a card.
Oh,
Yeah, and yeah, and then the comic books, like, oh man, all kinds of comic books, and for some reason they had a lot of comic books that had the front page torn off or the front cover torn off, and they're like 3 cents a piece, so I'd buy them. And another thing, we'd collect beer bottles and I guess other kinds of bottles, and we'd turn them into Mr. Berg. I think he was kind of irritated by it, but it's a lot of trouble for him. But back then,
What year was this? What?
Well, this was in the early 50s. you
Early
know,
50s.
50. Well, I don't know when the state quit that, stopped the business of,
You could get your deposit back.
yeah,
Oh.
you get your money back. But we used to have like a burlap sack full.
Beer bottles were a penny or 2 cents or something.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I remember something about beer bottles because they had a ring on the top, the ones you could return.
Okay. I
A
got,
ring around the base,
I
and
was
those
so
you
young, I
get
can't
3
even
cents for, I think.
remember all the details, but it must have been pretty early. And also, in the state, they had the tax tokens too, so it was
Yeah,
early 50s, but
yeah, I was 10 when we moved here, David was 5. He's still got a better memory than I do.
some things, memories are kind of funny, but, and then also another thing, my mom used to, for Friday nights, she'd take us out to dinner. Well, it'd be Todd's Cafe across the street.
Was Todd, Ernie and Georgine Todd?
Okay, yeah, Todd's. And then there was up in the corner on the left was a TV, kind of early for TVs back then, but, and then we'd watch the Friday night fights.
Was that TV store in that building at the time?
Oh, the store on the,
On the right, the south
on the
side.
right, yeah. Yeah, it was, I guess it was a TV or some kind of hardware store.
Yeah, I think it was TV repair.
Yeah. And then there's Todd's Cafe, and then, I don't know, but then there were, like I say, the Korean War was gone, and there were Marines, and they were nice guys, but they were always up at the counter, and I remember they had the punch, the punch cards, they'd buy a chance, and they'd be able to punch you.
Yeah,
And I don't know if they ever made any money on it, but
yeah.
they had a lot of,
Now, the Manchester Inn had been burned down
Oh.
years before, but was the boardwalk?
No,
Yeah,
I
no
don't remember
boardwalk.
anything about
But
the
there was
boardwalk.
but there's a lot of boardwalk left
there
going.
was a boardwalk going all the way down to the old ferry dock. The ferry dock was still there, and the boardwalk was, it was pretty primitive, but,
I remember I walked on the boardwalk quite a bit. Yeah,
yeah.
because my aunt lived his grandmother lived right down,
Oh,
what is that street?
Hemlock.
Hemlock.
right, now Hemlock, is that the one that goes down Duggan's Creek, or is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
And,
I always have a continued debate that whether the Manchester Inn was on the north or the south side of Hemlock. I don't, I thought it was on the south
It
side,
looks,
but the old mill is on the south side, and there's a lot of remnants of the mill. There's pilings out on the beach.
oh,
Yeah.
But on the north side is where they tell me it was, but I didn't think there was room between that and Dagny, excuse me.
do any of you remember when, this was probably, because I was really young, and my father would come down to Manchester to rent a boat. They had a boat rental playing area.
Yeah.
yeah,
You
Yeah.
could- it was sort of a poor man's fishing resort.
yeah,
Right.
And you get on, it had one of these not elevators, railways, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing was run by this little tiny store restaurant. I remember eating in there once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By hamburgers.
But that,
Well, there was a restaurant north of Scavanius too, but that was gone a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, the one he's talking about was on the
Was-
south side of the old
Right.
dock.
Right.
The old boathouse.
when did that disappear? I've often wondered.
I've got pictures of the marina fire, but it had been shut down for years before that.
It was pretty run down right at the end. Yeah, it was really, the building was pretty dilapidated.
That wasn't an IGA, it was just an old country store Berg's had when you were there. You remember when Ron took it over then?
No, I don't. That part I.
Okay. Ron Wilson bought it, it must have been from Berg then.
Okay, yeah, because Mr.
He changed
Bird-
it to an IGA.
Okay.
As you understand, go ahead and explain the Trimble's wife and the mansion burned down and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah, so Mrs. Trimble, she died in a kind of very tragic accident. Yeah, I think it was December of 29, right, kind of right about the time of the economy was starting to go down.
From driving off the pier?
Yeah, it just, car apparently the brake slipped, it didn't have a gear, I guess it just went off, and it's such a deep, harbor is so deep they couldn't get her out in time.
I heard they got the engine running and they forgot to take it, the engine started up, it was still in gear and
Oh.
anyway, one way or another, anyway, it went off.
Yeah, it's too bad. They had five children, and the two boys were trying to get the car fixed.
Yeah.
Do you remember the mansion over there?
Oh
On the
yeah,
island?
It was burned down, but
Yeah, I remember I spent some time over there, more than once, snooping around when the structure was still there.
oh, okay.
so that you would have been pretty young then, still, yeah.
No, I don't think I was a young one, that was still like that.
47 though, that would have been, you would have been.
Had it been burned already or?
I think it had been burned, but most of the structure.
But it was
still
a lot of it
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Chimneys, that.
yeah.
But, my dad told me back years ago that he used to go over there and they have all these big fireplaces and they used to roast marshmallows and hot dogs in their fireplaces. over
Yeah, yeah.
No, the article I referred to from Bob Roberts on that Seattle Times, he said that it was, I forget how many, it was a two-story structure. The main beams are 8x16s, clear fir, and then it had a couple of photographs, old, of course, black and white photos, but you could just see it was just absolutely beautiful. I mean, not only the building, but the gardens. Oh,
Yeah.
and and then Mrs. Trimble, she had one of the best libraries of Northwest history and the flora and the fauna, and that was all left there, when after she died, and that all is all looted, and it's all gone. But
Yeah, they had all all around the mansion there, but then they had a road going all the way around the island, and there were watchmen.
Okay.
They patrolled that.
You couldn't just go camping there, yeah?
No, it was a private estate.
They had like a 300-foot dock. It wasn't a ferry dock, it was just went out, and they had some kind of a pretty nice boat that transported them, but I don't know how did they have vehicles there, or?
They must have. I know they had a watchman's cabin partly along.
So who was Tremble? A lumber baron or what?
He was, I should have brought that article. He was about the turn of the century, they bought the island, and they were very wealthy. He was a Kentucky lawyer, but he was schooled in some of the best schools in Europe as a lawyer, but he made his money by buying up logged off land, I mean, all around here. And he'd buy it for pennies for an acre, and he just had kind of a genius. He would just know beforehand where development would take place. And then a couple of years later, he'd just sell it for thousands for an acre, you know. By the turn of the century, he was one of the wealthiest men in Seattle, and they were one of the few Seattle couples that was accepted in the New York society. They were, I mean, really up there. But then after she died, of course, his financial world started to go down too, and he lived all by himself. Made his own meals and took a streetcar and lived a very simple life, and he died in 1943. He was 80 years old. I don't know too much about what happened to the rest of his family, but kind of sad, but you know, they had a wonderful, probably about 30 years they lived there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. That's the most in-depth thing I've heard about Trimble so far, so that's great.
If you want, I'll bring that article down if you want to look at it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. Well, is any closing remarks from any of you three?
There's all kinds of stuff we haven't talked about. After the ferry went away here, they had passenger-only boats.
Right.
More than once, and private, of course, you didn't make enough money to support them, so they failed, but we'd go over to Seattle on a passenger-only boat.
Yeah, they had
Then left Manchester?
Left from Manchester straight to Seattle, yeah.
They had a float.
Who ran that? Was that Puget Sound Ferry Company?
No, it was just a private
guy.
private entrepreneur tribe, yeah.
PSN, yeah.
But they had
That was
moved away.
Peabody.
Peabody, yeah. You know, they, with the Fauntleroy dock, then it was a lot quicker, you know, shorter distance to go from Harper rather than from here.
Right.
And then there was no parking at all at Harper. I mean, it was just, that was a big problem with the Harper dock. So they built a big parking lot at Southworth, and that made it a lot better.
Oh, yeah. Talking about parking, I remember Mr. Oakes telling my mom that during the war, the cars would line up, clear up past our house, up the hill.
Yeah. Wow.
So there wasn't any parking here either.
And then they tried to run a bus from here to Harper, and tried a couple different ones. In fact, in that Manchester Memories book, there's a picture of a couple buses. I remember the old Ford, though. It was an old Ford flathead V8. I don't know, but it smoked like crazy. The inside of the bus was just filled with oil smoke because the thing was in such bad shape. But I remember riding on that, going down there.
Well, then I don't remember that. I remember going to Annapolis. It was a nicer bus.
Okay, yeah.
And then we'd go over to the Y. That's why I learned to swim at the Bremerton, the old Y.
Yeah. I wondered how we got to, I've forgotten that.
But we didn't go to Portia, we just went to Annapolis, and Russell and the Thorough, they'd take us over there.
There was one, I grew up in the house that was the owner of the brick mill house, or not necessarily the owner, but the manager of it. And apparently when the house was new, the road would squiggled up the side of the hill, went around in front of the house, and then continued on up to the old Newell house, way back in the woods. But when in World War II, the Army put in an anti-aircraft gun emplacement. You know, it was like from here to that truck sitting out there from where we lived. So they instead of letting the road go out in front of the house, they made it go right up alongside of it. And they had all these huge Army trucks going up and down there. And so my younger years, I remember all that. I didn't realize it was a war going on probably, you know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, is this the same emplacement that if you left your house and across the slough, which is the from Southworth Drive, you go to Olympiad, and take a left, and you go down Olympiad and over the slough or whatever you call it, the inlet there, and you just go a block or two, and that's where I was told there was a gun emplacement.
Yeah, but that was later.
that was the Korean War.
Yeah. It was Korean War and even later.
National Guard, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're talking about one that's next to the Harper Park?
No, it was part of the Harper Park.
But very good. Anything else from you gentlemen?
Oh, on the brush picking business, I grew up with a lot of these people who would pick brush were sort of ne'er-do-wells,
Yeah.
you know, and they were young, they didn't have any families necessarily, and they'd go out and pick some brush and get enough brush to get a drink or a 6-pack of beer, and then they'd come back and they'd hang around the brush house. And so I grew up hearing all these tales and all these guys, you know, just having a good time all the time. Every now and then you'd run into a father of a family who was doing it, you know, that was how he was making his living.
You could make pretty good money, I think, if you worked at it.
Yeah. One of the funniest stories that I've heard from that crew is they were all hanging around the brush house one time. I don't know when this must have been way back in the probably early 50s. They came up with when you're out picking brush, there's a lot of downed trees, and it's kind of hard if you've got a 40-pound bale of brush on your back to crawl over a downed log. So they came up with an idea that they would import some kangaroos and tie these big bales of brush on the kangaroos and let the kangaroos hop out with it. And they even went so far as they actually called the Australian ambassador's office, the consul in Seattle. And I imagine they probably got laughed out, but anyway.
No.
Those kinds of things were, when you're a little guy like I was, you get a little different perspective on
Yeah.
what life, what some people do in life.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you three gentlemen coming in here this afternoon, and thanks again.